So the session is being recorded now, and we will share the link of the session with all participants in a follow-up email. And please raise all your questions in the Q&A section. We will be pausing and taking questions after each session, but to keep to time, we will try to answer up to 3 questions after each and every session. So please make sure to add your questions in the Q&A section only. It allows us to manage and group your questions and queries and address them collectively. And lastly, chat will be open and will be moderated. I'll now hand it over to Gustav Prekelt, co-founder of Turn.io, for a quick introduction to share his vision and thoughts around chat for impact around the times of crisis. Gustav?
Thanks, Indrani, and hi, everybody. And thank you all for joining today. As Indrani said, my name is Gustav Prekelt, and I am in beautiful Cape Town, where I just got back from my very first trip in 2 years. And I know we've all been spending a lot of time on Zooms over the last 2 years, and I'm really hoping. I was very lucky to meet with some of our friends from WhatsApp and from some of you all in the US, and I hope that we all get to see each other in person. But thank you for joining today. I think just to start off with, as you know, we've worked together with WhatsApp over the last couple of years to build a secure and trusted messaging system and go to scale, what we call chat for impact. So to use direct messaging from a person to provide support, not only in a time of crisis, but to help them build the lives that they want to live by providing them information at the right time. Over the last 2 years with COVID specifically, there have been a number of services that have been launched at speed. And we wanted to build, at least start building a community where we can share some of our learnings over the last couple of years, but we also realized that a lot of the organizations we've been working with know a lot more about building services, taking them to scale, and we thought it would be a great idea to get us all in a call together to learn from each other. We hope over time to be able to build a series of playbooks. As you know, in turn, we make learnings available as downloadable playbooks that you can run in your own account. And we hope this is only the start of a number of these sessions that we can learn from each other. Maybe I think over the last couple of months, WHO was a great example. The response in Afghanistan with CARE. Most recently, the team supported the Ukrainian emergency services. And what we've learned is that it's of absolute cardinal importance to have services that are trusted by the end user, that of course you can launch at speed, that have localized content that is translated correctly for everyone to understand. And very importantly, that obviously can be launched at speed. We want to share a little bit of our learnings here today, and to that point, we've compiled a couple of case studies. But we're also sharing today with a number of amazing organizations that we've been hugely impressed by the work that they've done, specifically on WhatsApp over the last couple of months and before. And we hope that you'll find this really interesting. I think specifically to some of the technical and other provisions that we're talking about today, obviously, Turn can provide, together with WhatsApp, the infrastructure. It's an incredible opportunity that we can deliver this type of content and these personalized services securely and at huge scale. But we all realize that there's also a lot of risk. How do we make sure that these services are trusted, that people know who they're communicating with? How do we know that they are distributed at scale? How do we know how to translate them and get them localized at speed? So I'm really looking forward to the session today. I'm thanking everybody here and already who's prepared some decks. And I'm going to hand over to Pippa, who's going to share some case studies with us. Over to you, Pippa.
Great, thanks, Gustav. Hi, everyone. My name is Pippa Yates, and I'm one of the other co-founders here at Turn.io. So I'm joining you from Cape Town, South Africa. I'm going to take you through 2 quick case studies that show you just how a chat service can be used to support vulnerable populations in the midst of a crisis. So at Turn, our mission is to increase access to effective support for vulnerable people everywhere. So we were really humbled to support CARE International to launch a chatbot and help desk in the middle of the crisis in Afghanistan in August 2021. After being overwhelmed by emails, the CARE team asked us, along with the Meta team, to help them give people access to answers to the most frequent questions so they could triage only the complex cases to the humans in their team. Their chat service provided current and previous staff with access to important information on how CARE could support them during this time, including information on visas and application processes. The service ensured teams on the ground were assisted as a matter of urgency. And now the CARE team is exploring how they might use WhatsApp in other crisis response scenarios and humanitarian support scenarios across their various country offices. After this experience with CARE International, we knew we wanted to prepare a crisis response playbook that we could use to streamline our approach to the next crisis. It was just the evening before the Russian invasion of Ukraine that we were talking to the Meta Civic Engagement team, and I see some of you guys on this call with us, about our plans for our crisis response playbook. We didn't expect a crisis to emerge the next day, nor for it to be in the home country of one of our Turn teammates. But we wanted to do what we could to help. And we had the immense pleasure of working with Meta and the State Emergency Services of Ukraine to launch a chat helpline to support citizens during this very difficult time. The service provides key updates from the emergency services, including news and instructions on how to keep safe, how to find the closest shelter and humanitarian support, as well as first aid tips, mental health guidance, and much more. And due to the heightened cybersecurity concerns, we took extra caution to set up a secure private cloud environment that was further protected by strict user access and IP access limitations, which Simon is going to share some best practices around shortly. And while the technical setup only took a few hours, it was the content sourcing, uploading, and review process that prevented us from launching sooner. The government websites were down due to cyber attacks, and team members responsible for either reviewing content or creating some or translating it were often inaccessible. But we got it live in 4 days, and the service was promoted through SMS, government official Facebook pages, and Facebook and Instagram advertisements. It is now 6 weeks since launch, and we're definitely due for another round of content restructuring and editing down. But if you'd like to try it out, you can interact with the service by scanning the QR code on the screen today. And please do feel free to share this with your Ukrainian friends and family and publicly. As I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, in times of crisis, the relevant information changes all the time. So every day we're adding new content and iterating on the service experience. And in the coming weeks, the SES team will be adding new content to support their first responders, the health professionals, firemen and women, disarmament teams, and general volunteers that are doing extremely important work on the ground. We're looking forward to understanding that use case in much more detail over the coming weeks. We've learned a lot from these experiences about how to establish trust, consider data privacy and security in crisis scenarios, and as well as how best to source, create, and structure ever-changing content on chat. And so we've collated some of our top learnings in the next section on best practices. So I'm going to hand over to Simon Dahan to get us started.
Thanks, Pippa. So my name is Simon Dahan. I am one of the co-founders of Turn.io as well, and I am the CTO. So welcome to the session on best practices. We're just going to go through some pointers quickly on things that we've learned and that may be useful for you all as well, as you are either already involved in your crisis response work or are preparing to. Pippa has already touched on it a little bit, but what I want to start with is establishing trust. Trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. And I think it rings especially true in a time of crisis. And so there's little value in driving traffic or raising awareness for impact services in a time of crisis when we haven't gone through the necessary to establish trust. And so for the Ukrainian service, and I'm just using this as an example that Pippa talked about earlier, we've ensured that every service received a verified green checkmark before launching. And this is similar to, I guess, the KYC, the Know Your Customer patterns that we know from banking for WhatsApp services. Basically, it confirms, are you who you say you are, and have you gone through the necessary due diligence to prove that? Secondly, pay attention as well in the screenshot there to filling in your business organization's details and link through to secondary sources of information of online identity that help establish and affirm who you say you are. Again, everything in terms of best practices, I think this is the best one really to start with. How do you establish trust? How do you confirm that you are who you say you are? Because in a time of crisis, a lot of effort will actually go into discrediting your service and your online identity. So after that, we go to, there's a few slides now on data privacy and security and some of the learnings there. I think the first question is, and this is a particularly difficult one in a time of crisis, is data collection. How do we decide what data to choose? And so when using chat for impact in a time of crisis, one generally centralizes information in one's chat service because it's simply easier to manage and publish. But this can also make one a target of digital abuse. So the same information you may be collecting to improve your service delivery can, in the event of a data breach, be weaponized against the very same users that you are trying to help in an organized disinformation campaign. So knowledge of what kinds of questions are being asked or where knowledge gaps are can serve both purposes, unfortunately. And we need to be aware of this fact. So we need to apply extra thought to determining what kind of information we ask, what we solicit, and what we store. So as an example, I've posted a screenshot here of geolocations. In a time of war, those should simply be avoided at all costs, since they provide accurate information on users' locations and could reveal information about that user, putting them in harm's way. Thereafter, when we've gone through the process of asking these questions, do we really need this information? Is it responsible for us to ask this information? And can we ensure that we do not expose users to more risk by supplying us with this information? So once we've gone through that, we still have the question around how do we decide how long to hold on to that information for and why? And so out of the work that we've done to date, there's a few tools in turn that help us with this. And we can go to the next slide and I'll touch on the first one. The first one is called data scrubbing. And this was added after the launch of a MyGov service. This wasn't necessarily a crisis service, but it was one where we wanted to be very careful with the data that we store. And so Turn has the ability to remove all content and messages, attachments of messages sent and received on a server after a configurable amount of days. The minimal storage time is 24 hours. Data scrubbing leaves contact details and phone numbers intact, and reporting on monthly active users remains intact, but all of the conversations, all of the messages sent and received, all of that history is completely gone. So should some bad actor manage to get access to a service for whatever reason, and this can be simply via social engineering or compromised email accounts, then at most what they would have is the last 24 hours of messages, of the content of the messages and the phone numbers of individuals. So for certain use cases, this could be an incredibly useful tool to start applying. Data scrubbing on Turn can be enabled on a per number basis. So if you're interested in this feature, please reach out to support and let us know the use case and how you're planning on using it. Since it deletes message history, all of the contents, it's irreversible. And so it has big implications for how search and collections work in the product. So if you are interested in this, it is worthwhile to actually talk to us and go through that scenario and see what this means for your current use case and whether that is a reasonable option for you. Next is data culling. And so we added data culling in response to the work that the UNHCR is doing with their refugee services. And data culling takes data scrubbing one step further. It deletes all messages sent and received, including any attachments, and all contact details, including any custom fields and phone numbers. It leaves an anonymous, empty chat record in place for accounting purposes, but that record is not visible in the user interface. And the downside of data culling is that MAUs may be inflated due to users being counted twice if culling happens frequently. And so again, culling is like data scrubbing. It is far more aggressive. It is irreversible. All phone numbers will be removed. But it does add a level of guarantee with regards to that if somehow someone manages to get access to data in ways that they should not, then at least the impact of that data leak is limited because we are not holding on to data for significant amount of time. Similar to scrubbing, data culling is enabled on a per number basis if you want it time-based. It is enabled on the API for all clients though. But it requires a custom integration as it is an irreversible action. And so once the user's details are culled, there is no reversal of that possible. It is completely permanent. And it really requires a solid understanding on behalf of the implementation before you start using. So similar to data scrubbing, feel free to reach out to us on Turn.io support to find out whether this is a useful tool for your specific use case. We think it is very useful in very specific use cases, but it does need us all to pay some attention. It does significantly increase the security of the service simply because if data is deleted, there's no more accessing it. And so it does not pose a risk anymore. The next slide is on security enhancements. Again, this is coming out of the work that we did for Ukraine and WHO and UNHCR. And so it's possible for us to completely fence off a Turn.io private cloud installation down to specific IP addresses, which means network access is completely limited to a specific set of accounts, and also enforcing hardware security keys, which if you're not familiar, are these kinds of little things. I don't know if you can see me on the camera, but those are fingerprint readers that restrict access. And so if you are running a service on a Turn private cloud, these are things that we can turn on for your accounts. And it just adds an extra layer of security down to the network level with regards to who can access your Turn installation and under what conditions. So these are some of the best practices and learnings that I think were some key highlights of the work that we've done over the last few months. We have a couple of minutes for Q&A right now to go through some of these, if there are any questions.
Simon, so the Q&A section is not actually visible. So I've just posted on chat asking people to either post a question there, or you can raise your hand and just or unmute yourself and ask the question as well. We'll just keep it open.
Okay. If there are no questions right now, or if other questions do emerge later on, please feel free to post them. For now, I'm going to be handing over to Pippa, who will be taking us through the content design. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Simon. If you're like me, it took me a bit of time to understand all those security enhancements, but seeing it live and in action in Ukraine these last few weeks has been really, really interesting and makes us feel good about how we've added those extra security additions. But I'm going to talk to you a bit about content design because this can often be the slowest part of the process, especially during crisis when sourcing content potentially could be difficult. So getting real-time access to information on the ground, to translations, loading and then testing that content. And in these scenarios, both speed to publish life-saving content, as well as the accuracy of that content in that moment is both of essence. And so I think, one key basic that we've learned over the last little while is having a native language speaker and or translator in your team constantly during the first couple of days and weeks of your launching these crisis response services is absolutely essential. But we know also that our content process, specifically in Ukraine, would have been made even faster if we'd had a base set of content already translated and ready for chat beforehand. So we hope with a lot of your help on this call that we'll be able to build that out for our crisis response playbook. But for now, I'm going to talk to you through some of how to create some crisis appropriate and really simple user-friendly chat messages based on what we've learned over the last while. So let's get started. So first up, I think along with what Simon said about trust, your welcome message is probably one of the most important messages that you have on your service during these crisis scenarios, because it's the first message that someone sees. And you'll see here are two fairly different scenarios, both used in crisis response. And I'll explain a couple of best practices as we go through these. So your welcome message not only is the first thing users see, but it definitely sets the tone for the rest of your service. So you'll see that example on the left is the Ukrainian emergency services team. There's a very serious tone. It has a welcome message, but it really gets straight to the point. It got a little bit of information on how to navigate. But I think you can tell, even if you don't speak either Ukrainian or Spanish on the right, these elements that you can see based on how the content is structured, that is a very serious tone. Whereas in the Voices of Venezuela example on the right, it's a much more friendly tone designed to make the user feel like they're talking to someone who really understands them, someone like them. And each of these are two different approaches to establishing that trust that you need when users first engage with your service. So depending on what crisis you're dealing with, what existing relationships or not that you have with users, you'll need to think quite clearly through what the tone you want to establish and what tone of voice is right for your service and your audience. The second is data policies. Now, Simon's touched on what data to store, to think through very clearly your terms and conditions and how long you store data for. But often you want to collect, if it is safe for you to do so, to collect consent, to send notifications at a later stage. It's always good to collect this right up front. And you'll see in the example on the right, they even included a voice note to explain some of the terms and conditions so that users who might not want to have read or didn't want to read the long terms and conditions could easily understand them. So making your users aware of kind of your data policies is really important. Next is always make it clear if the service is completely automated, part automated, or fully engaging with a human, because your users are going to have very, very different expectations of what type of service this is and what they can ask and how they engage. And should your service be mostly automated, always giving users close to upfront as possible indication of how they can actually access a human is important. And lastly, it's really important to make it clear what the service provides and how the user can access what they need as quickly as possible. In these times of crisis, the time it takes to navigate to the information the user needs can drastically change the user's outcomes. And so I'm going to show you two examples now of different menu types which play into this. The one is a list with short phrases of a menu text with emojis. You can just go to the next slide. The second is a menu built using WhatsApp's list message type, which opens this drawer and user clicks on the buttons. Now, there are pros and cons to each. But when you're considering your user trying to access the most important information in crisis, putting all your options quite plainly in a message and allowing users to type something to navigate has the benefit of allowing them to see all the options at once, but it might take them longer to navigate and it's potentially more error prone. List messages make it very easy to select your option, but you can't necessarily see the options up front when you first get the list message. You have to open up this drawer. So you need to think about, what the pros and cons for your types of service relate to this, but key option is to always keep these menus short. And now that's really hard, and you'll see if you're experiencing the ACS service we built, as you add more content and as the scenario changes in the crisis, you're going to want to make that menu of options or options of information longer and longer. And so it's important to consider periodically to go and review your menu, reorganize and shorten and keep it as tight as possible, making sure that always the most relevant content is always right at the top and closest. So the next is kind of navigation matters when you're in an actual message. So I want to show you two types of navigation at the end of the message. So the one is using the same kind of emojis, numbers, and keywords to navigate, and it's kind of generally structured at the end of the message. That's become the general pattern. And it's important to stick with these patterns as users start to learn how this type of navigation works. And similarly, on the right, buttons are definitely the option of choice in this scenario, as users can really quickly just click them, but having consistency in your button placement. So for example, always having the menu as the second button or always having next as the first button can play a big difference in terms of ensuring that your users don't make errors over time when trying to quickly navigate through content. So now I just want to touch a little bit about content length and structure. So on WhatsApp, you can send a message of 4,096 characters. But if you think about other similar short content formats, an SMS is 160 characters, the tweet limit is 280, and most engagement happens on Facebook pages under 50 characters. So we really advise you keep your chat messages under 450 characters. Anything longer will require the users to click a read more button at the bottom of the message. And as your users in crisis, often in a rush and under really high cognitive load due to stress, this is probably the #1 mistake people make, is to make content too long. It's great to use different types of formatting to break up your content, and that can definitely help. But the key thing is to shorten and simplify content as much as possible. But now, if you're in a rush to publish life-saving content, like we were in the SES context, it's really okay to post longer form content, but come back to edit and shorten it later to make it easier to consume. As many of the government websites were down from cyber attacks when we were loading the SES content, such as this message, we had to source from the SES Facebook page and from PDFs that were shared with us. So we did a lot of copying and pasting to get content live, and then went back to shorten, edit. And this is a constant iterative cycle. But one of the biggest time savers we had in this service was to create this template for news messages, which this example describes. So you see there's an image that we had a date because we know the timing of information during crisis is really, really important. How old is this information? Then we had the kind of content of the message. And at the bottom in the footer, we had a link to the source of the content. So in this case, it was pulled from the SES Facebook page. So we did that specifically for a couple of reasons. One, in contexts like this where misinformation and disinformation is rife, giving your users indications of credibility, of ways to verify that the content comes from that source is key. But also think about users will forward this content to other users. And when they forward it, they won't necessarily get the same cues around trustworthy and safety that they would get if they're interacting with your service on WhatsApp themselves. They won't see that green tick, they won't see the information about the organization, they would just see the message. So adding any signals of trustworthiness and any resources that people can go and verify the source of these content that you're sharing is really important. And so this saved us a lot of time creating this template. And so anyone in our team could then follow up and go add content following this template structure. And this also enabled us to finally automate the way we publish content from the SCS Facebook page and pull it into our WhatsApp line, which not only will saves our team time, but will save the emergency services team time in terms of updating news content specifically going forward, as they'll only need to publish it on Facebook and we'll pull it directly into the WhatsApp line. So next, I think at Turn, we definitely believe that every social impact organization should have a chat help desk where your users can ask your questions and get personalized, impactful answers. And we've seen this work really well in both the CARE International example and with Unhcr, which you'll hear from in a bit. Because this can not only save time, but definitely can have a huge impact. So you'll need to design that handover between your bot and your human. And it's always important to make that as clear as possible when I'm handing over from an automated system to a human and back, as well as giving examples of how quickly you're likely to respond so people can manage their expectations, but also collecting any other information you might need to help that user in an automated fashion so that your human agents can use their time efficiently when they're answering questions. So lastly, now that you've got some very specific tips on crisis appropriate structuring of different types of messages, here are some more general tips. The first is that your users will make mistakes. People will never use your service how you imagine they will. And so you do need to plan for errors, but also to check periodically what is triggering your error message so that you can adjust your content accordingly. It's a treasure trove of questions that people ask that you potentially don't have an answer to. So building time in to review those and adjust your content is really key. You will need to plan and how to re-engage your users, but as we said, only if it is safe for you to do so. And you'll need to plan to get message templates on WhatsApp submitted to Meta for approval before you can send any notifications. So doing this ahead of time and making sure that the quality of your service is high enables you to send those really important emergency alerts or re-engagement messages when you need to. And then lastly, launching your service is always just the very beginning. We always recommend launching with the simplest thing you can and iterating as you learn how your users interact and what they find most valuable. So make sure you plan your time post-launch on a daily and a weekly basis to kind of iterate and iterate and iterate. And of course, if any of you are wanting to launch any of these services, we're always here to help, and we'll continue to share what we learn as these best practices evolve. But that brings us to the end of the session. I'm going to hand over to Indrani for Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Pippa. Do we have any questions for her? Apologies again, I know we don't have a Q&A section, so if you would want to, you're more than welcome to either type up your questions as you think of them in the chat section, or either unmute yourself and speak up now.
Hey, Indrani, Ben here from the Civic Engagement team at WhatsApp. Good to see you all. One question, I know we've discussed this a lot as a working group, but Pippa, if you could share any thoughts on an opt-in and promotion strategies. How do these crisis response organizations drive discoverability of the service, which can be especially sensitive and tricky in the context of a crisis where you may not want to use the megaphone approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely more of an art than a science at this point. We're still learning a lot about what works in different scenarios in this space. I think what I can take from what we tried so far, the messenger effect really plays a key role. Who is sharing the service. Who like, is it coming peer-to-peer? What we've seen in a lot of these services, there's a lot of traffic driven organically peer-to-peer. We saw that in the pandemic with the World Health Organization, and we've seen that in other scenarios as well. We also seen success from official sources promoting these lines. So if you have your, in this case, your government officials or official spokespeople also sharing information. And last but not least, you know, using strategically develop advertising on Facebook and Instagram and click to WhatsApp ads can direct users to these services as well. And we found some use of those in different scenarios. So SMS has also been extremely effective in the Ukraine service as well, but particularly because it came from the official government SMS number that gets used for all of these types of alerts and updates. So I think that played a huge role in kind of people trusting that source of sharing the service. Anyone else on our team want to weigh in on this one? It's a great question, Ben. Any other experience from across the Meta crisis response scenarios?
Yeah, Pippa, just to weigh in again from the WhatsApp standpoint, I think you covered kind of the menu of options. To have persistent promotion, it tends to work best when you have the organization itself really invested in that promotion, developing content. They'll have, you know, the contact list that they maintain. So we can, you know, kind of give a booster shot, so to speak, with Facebook ads or Facebook quick promotions to get the word out upon launch. But really those persistent channels and high levels of engagement come when the partner organization is heavily invested. But I'd invite other members of the WhatsApp team to weigh in as well.
Okay.
I think we should then move on to the next section. I'd like to now hand over to Erica Perez. She's the Innovation Officer at UNHCR Panama, to take us through the details of their case study and how they used WhatsApp as a crisis response channel. Erica?
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Part of UNHCR Innovation Service, outposted in Panama, as Indrani was introducing me, but now covering like for these weeks for my supervisor who has a global role in the digital inclusion program of UNHCR. So I'm pretty sure all of you are familiar with what UNHCR is, but just like a brief overview, UNHCR is the mandated UN agency to basically protect refugees, forcibly displaced populations, also stateless people, to assist in their voluntary repatriation and also integration and resettlement in third countries. We are headquarters in Geneva. We have 5 regional bureaus and over 135, I think, country operations. I think we can go next. So yeah, basically last year when COVID hit, we were facing with a major challenge, how a UN agency that is protecting vulnerable populations can assist people on the move and people in need of international protection better in a remote way. So with all the social distance impositions that we were facing, basically UNHCR needed to step up the remote basically support that we were providing to our populations of concern to make sure like this trust like UNHCR had with the people that we are serving was maintained. Also, UNHCR has been recently adopting like like stronger commitments to accountability to affected populations, that this is basically a need. There was a need that for UNHCR to basically strengthen all the remote engagement channels that we had in place. So also from many like information ecosystems assessments that we've been doing, we knew that basically like the two channels that like especially here in the Americas, refugees and migrants were using the most were WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. So basically, from the innovation standpoint of view, we said, hey, we need to meet the communities where they are. We cannot really impose like additional platforms. We need to go and provide information about our services, about local opportunities through these two channels. So basically, on the onset of the COVID pandemic, this is why we came up with the pilot project to use WhatsApp to engage with communities. We were evaluating like several options, and then we decided to go with Turn.io or the Prekel Foundation. Like among several reasons, one was the possibility of hosting the service within our private cloud, because UNHCR takes very seriously the protection of the data of the people that we are serving. Also, like the social impact aspect of the basically Turn.io and the Prekel Foundation was another aspect that we took into consideration, as we thought that they would understood our use case and our purpose, and also like to be a relatively small company, this allowed for more flexibility. So we thought like Turn.io was the perfect partner in this pilot project. So without further delay, we will pass to the video, which will be explaining a little bit more about what have been doing so far in this space. Thank you, Carola. Oh.
UNHCR is committed to putting people at the centre of its humanitarian response. Building on our international commitments, UNHCR has policies in place to ensure that we remain accountable to the people we assist. This includes how we communicate with communities. When people are forced to flee their homes, one of their most basic needs is access to timely and reliable information. Increasingly, the refugees we work with tell us that WhatsApp is one of the main tools they use to communicate with friends and family. Where communities tell us that they want to use digital tools to engage with humanitarian responders, we ask one key question. What would be your preferred channel or platform for communicating with UNHCR?
WhatsApp. Porque WhatsApp me permite comunicarme con personas que están afuera en Venezuela, también te permite para comunicarte con personas aquí, puedes comunicarte en grupos, es un poco más accesible, de verdad, para la comunicación.
WhatsApp porque brinda mucha privacidad a través del cifrado entre mensajes.
With this knowledge, UNHCR is piloting a tool for two-way communication with forcibly displaced people that uses the WhatsApp messaging service. Thanks to generous support from the Government of Luxembourg, we have been able to partner with the Prekel Foundation to use their Turn.io tool. Turn.io uses WhatsApp's business product to help large organisations communicate with people at scale. For UNHCR, the platform allows us to share relevant information with forcibly displaced people on their request through the WhatsApp messaging app, using a combination of automated and human-assisted responses. Using the WhatsApp service, individuals can seek answers to common questions about their rights and the services available to them. They can also be referred quickly to UNHCR staff when they need specific support. For example, to report an incident of violence or abuse.
Y esta herramienta es más una manera de fortalecer la comunicación con las comunidades de personas refugiadas en el Ecuador. El principal objetivo es que las personas puedan acceder a información útil, actualizada, que sea verificada también, que puedan confiar en esta información para saber cuáles son sus derechos en el país, cómo acercarse a la ACNUR, cómo acercarse a las organizaciones socias de la ACNUR, cómo hacer una solicitud de asilo y una diversidad de otros elementos, otros contenidos.
We know that privacy and data protection are extremely important to the communities we work with. Through our close partnership with Prekel, we are able to ensure that people's data is stored securely. We're also making sure that people using the service understand their data rights and what they're signing up to by providing them with a detailed privacy statement and opt-in questions before they start. With this pilot, we hope to demonstrate that using WhatsApp allows UNHCR to provide information and engage with displaced people in a way that suits their preferences, meets their needs, and manages their personal data responsibly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So basically the video that we just saw, it was Diego Anardi from Ecuador, who is my colleague leading on this project in the country. Ecuador was one of the first countries to join the first phase of the pilot project. And I'm going to talk specifically about the Americas, where we have a greater demand for this service. Currently, we have 4 lines operational, which are basically Chile, our Brazil, our Ecuador, and Mexico. And now we are adding 4 countries more in Central America. The video was basically representing a user testing session with refugees. Basically for us, is critical to ensure like the services that we are providing to refugees and migrants are meeting their needs. So they have an opportunity to input into the content. They have an opportunity to also try the service and see if it's useful or not, and also to provide their opinions and suggestions to make sure that this solution is being maximizing their use and capabilities. So as I was mentioning, we have 4 lines in the region with over 40,000 unique users and growing by the day. At the moment, we are also planning to support the Ukraine response. So for UNHCR is mainly outside, so in the neighboring countries, in six new countries. So we are dealing with the operations on basically how to create content, basically also like to conduct data protection impact assessments to make sure like the operation understand the potential risks of using this service, and also putting mitigation measures in place. With this pilot, we were able also to see a variety of use cases within UNHCR. At the beginning, we were very focused like on information sharing and more limited on the sharing personal data or conducting, for example, registration activities through WhatsApp. But we also saw like the needs on the ground, right? Like, for example, between the border of Guatemala and Mexico, where over 500 people were arriving on a daily basis, our colleagues on the ground couldn't cope with the demand. So they needed like remote registration channels to be able to provide a fast response to refugees and migrants transiting through Central America. So that's where we decided also to expand a little bit our use cases and test new approaches, basically. As we were mentioning on the video, we were using at the beginning the service like as a more automated, so the chatbot kind of capability, but we also saw the need for providing like human-based responses. This is a bit of a challenge for us because not in all the countries we have like dedicated capacity that can be basically reading all the messages or identifying all those messages that that need like a human response. So while in Mexico, for example, they have like a person like is dedicated to the hotline and the chatbot, we have other operations that their capacity is more reduced. So they're saying that this is an automated line from the beginning, and they are monitoring basically the messages on a weekly basis. For scale, we've seen like this solution like being able to be replicable like very fast, and like from our like understanding of how the pilot is like going, we see like potential to institutionalize basically this service to be basically a corporate UNHCR solution globally. We can go to the next one, Carola, if you want. Yes, so the key learnings for us, like through the various countries that we've been supporting, like is the ability of being deployed been deploying this solution in a quick, efficient manner. I have to thank super much the Turn team, and especially Manish, who has been like my most contacted person on WhatsApp, because every question that I had, like on everything, like possibilities, counter structure, like ideas on how to best implement a feature, another, the support team has been extremely responsive and supportive. So for us, this is like a thing that we appreciate a lot. Also, like on the scoping, we have like several challenges, but these are our main link to Unhcr needs, right? Like not every Unhcr operation needs the same thing. So like a correct initial scoping and discussion with colleagues in the like relevant operations is key for our success, and not rejiggling everything that you have done at a later stage. Yeah, to make sure like the service is going like smoothly. And the capacity, what I was mentioning before is like, it depends on the operations. Like some operations might have like dedicated teams that can basically manage the tool, but there are others like need some strong hand holding, basically from the innovation service who is leading this pilot on a more institutional level, to make sure like everything that like they're doing is correct, or like uploading the content, creating the content, the automations. So yeah, like from our side, we invested like a significant amount of time, like providing like the first level support to these operations. I have to say that they're extremely engaged and eager to learn, and never like they even surprise us. Like not so long ago, like for example, the Ecuador colleagues just basically introduced like new accessibility features within the line. Like they've been basically creating like audio messages for all the 250 plus content blocks that they had in the system. So we see like they're like once they have like this skill set, they're like even eager to basically learn more and more, and basically maximize the use of Turn. So I think we can go to the next one. Oh, is a thank you one. These are my contact details. You can know more about our program on our website, or you can contact us if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica. We have a bunch of questions already that we want to ask you, but I just thought maybe we'll see if anybody from the attendees want to go first. Okay, so quick question from me is, are there any standard content that you always need to deliver that could be prepared for chat before a crisis in maybe multiple languages?
So in case you're asking for like a standard content, what we recommend from the innovation service is usually like a list of topics, or like a simpler structure of like topics that like as a minimum like country operations should put in. Like the first one is like, who is Unhcr in the country, what services they are offering, like other humanitarian organizations in the country and the services that these organizations are offering. And also like opportunities in the country, like access to services like education, health, and also as a minimum one, we are also asking for like an opinion or how to like express suggestions. Each context is super different. So each country operations are encouraged to basically produce their own content, because we've seen, like, for example, that operations here in the Americas have been using, like, for example, the Ecuador content as a base, and then, for example, didn't work and they had to redo it all again. Because topics perhaps were not super relevant for that content, or they were new ones that like our users were more interested in. So while we can recommend having like a set list of topics, or like, yes, like having a structure is not really, from what we've seen, is not really productive to have like pre-content like made, because yeah, each operation and each context is a bit different. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Indrani.
Oh, it does. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have a follow-up question. Hi. Yes. Hi, everyone. My follow-up question actually is, taking into account what you've said, how do you ensure that your WhatsApp messages are consistent with your other communication channels? Can you maybe share some insight around that?
Yeah, thank you, Kanya, for your question. And this is super interesting because what we are trying to avoid here is like duplication of effort, but ensuring at the same time that the right information is reaching the populations that we are serving. So for example, Unhcr has already like other channels available in the country, like in a given country, like for example, their help pages, where they act as a repository of key protection information. And they also have like email addresses, like for example, sometimes they have national hotlines, right? So what we are making sure is like we are signposting people to the right content. So for example, if we have like content available on the WhatsApp, we are sure like we are referring those people to the existing channels and also to existing like referral mechanisms. So we are not duplicating that case. We are complementing the existing channels. We know, for example, that people don't usually go to Unhcr websites, but we still need to have them to build trust, to have like a case for, you know, institutional content available online. So if people prefer to receive and share information on WhatsApp, we are making sure, like, for example, we put these links of available information online in case people need to read more, or we refer them to the existing like alternative contact mechanism that we have in a given country, making sure like it's not duplicative, right? We are basing the information that we have on the chatbot or the WhatsApp line on existing information online, or even complemented, right? Sometimes we have more information on the chatbot if it's not on the website. But yeah, this is our approach in general.
Thank you, Erica. Super useful and helpful. Thank you.
Erica, I have a question, because one of the insights that I read in your blog posts about those services that I found super interesting was that you mentioned that you were surprised that your staff indicated that they were happier engaging with persons of concern through chat. And so I wanted you to just speak to that and what that learning was all about.
Yeah, I think when we meant happier, we mean like sometimes we mean like a reduced time answering repetitive questions. You know, like sometimes protection, the staff members, which are usually the interface between Unhcr and the people, well, refugees and migrants in the case of Americas, they are just like, you know, answering, like they've been telling us like, you cannot imagine how many times I've been answering this question, right? So through the implementation of these chatbots, they've seen a reduce in the number of like times that like questions have been asked, right? Because people were using de facto like the lines that were, or the information that was out there. So they've seen like a productivity increase, if I can tell you, or like more free time to be actually dedicated to other areas of work. So at the end of the day, to make them more efficient and maximizing the use of their time. So for them, it's also very frustrating, right, to be repeating the same questions all over and over. So I imagine like the lines or like the information available on WhatsApp is also contributing to be more efficient and less repetitive.
Well, yeah, that's really clear, and it's a great to learn. And I think the CARE International team has also seen some similar things, or just that reduction in answering the same question over and over. And yeah, then you can focus your attention on things that can have more impact in that scenario and use your time wisely. So thanks for sharing.
No, absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Well, thanks, Erica, for sharing your insights and learnings from the amazing work that you're doing. And we are so excited to be part of UNHCR's journey and cannot wait to support the services as they scale further across the world. Moving on, next, it is my pleasure to introduce Julia Sellers from sesame.org. She'll be taking us through how Sesame supported children and their families in Ukraine and also other host countries during the current crisis. Julia?
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation to share what Sesame Workshop is doing in response to Ukraine. So perhaps a little bit different than our previous presentations. This is a live case study that we're happy to share with you and learn a little bit more about how we could potentially partner with Turn.io. Sesame is working with Turn.io on a lot of our social impact programs in Central America, but we are in the initial stages of developing our response to Ukraine. So still kind of exploring avenues of collaboration there, I guess. So as mentioned, my name is Julia Sellers. I work on Sesame's partnership and fundraising team focused on our social impact portfolio. Sesame at large, as you know, is a trusted educational content provider for over 50 years, working in about 150 different countries. Our social impact portfolio in particular has touched about 50 different countries. But today I just wanted to share a little bit more about our work in crisis and conflict settings, as I think this is really an emerging area where Sesame has identified since 2017, when we started working in response to the Syrian refugee crisis, and really building on some of those lessons learned to respond to crises around the world. As you can see, work in Central America, Venezuela, most recently in Afghanistan. So really through an investment that happened in 2017 with MacArthur Foundation and later Lego, Sesame was kind of charged to do a lot of research and development to develop, Sesame specific programming for children in these contexts, and building on that, those experiences, we're now kind of developing a strategy of how we can build on those lessons learned for Ukraine. So we have an internal task force that has been developed with a variety of people across the organization, content creators, producers, educational technical specialists, marketing and strategy persons, contributing to better understand, where does Sesame fit in to the response. And I think, building on what others have said, I think what is so important for us as an organization is really to use the trust that Sesame has gained in communities over the last 50 years, and, think strategically about the type of content that we're providing for children, for caregivers, and for communities, both in Ukraine, and also thinking about the needs of host countries as well. So kind of the four, I guess, areas that we're most focused in this initial 8-month strategy that we've put together, which I'll share with you momentarily. Oh, sorry, can you go back just one slide? Thank you, is really helping children and families cope with the immediate trauma and fears that children have, being uprooted from their communities, losing their routine, their being separated from families, helping children really identify the emotions that they're feeling, and have conversations with trusted caregivers and providers to be able to manage some of those big changes, and using those Muppet characters that you see on your screen to kind of give children and families brief moments of joy and levity amidst such displacement and trauma and uncertainty. And then also on the flip side of being really child focused, which is what I think Sesame has been proven to do so well in so many different areas, but also giving caregivers the tools and information they need to be able to manage their own stress, and particularly in Ukraine, thinking about women who have been largely left with the burden of childcare as men have been separated from their families in need to respond to the war in country. But also thinking and using some of those same tools with caregivers as they transition to new communities and think about where they're going next, whether it's Poland or the UK or the United States, to help families maintain that level of cultural pride and identity that's is fragile in these types of contexts. And then later in our response, I think the last piece that we're really thinking about is the needs of communities themselves who will be receiving a lot of Ukrainian refugees. Whether it's a short period of time, longer periods of time, and the strains that they will feel in their resources, their systems, their health system, education systems, and learning to help communities, really integrate during this crisis. Next slide. So we have developed a phased approach, which we are just finishing the first phase. We finished the first phase on April 1st. So the first phase was really kind of an internal evaluation of the type of content that Sesame already had in Ukrainian and Russian, and which of that content is really appropriate for children in this setting. So two of the outcome areas that we were focused on in February up until just a few days ago were social emotional learning. So providing kind of a psychosocial toolkit and first aid kit for children to have breaks of joy, watching a 10-minute Sesame video that's focused on something else other than the trauma that they're currently feeling, and also integrating playful learning and providing tools and resources for children and family to be able to cope with what they're dealing with. So we released on April 1st an initial 10 videos on YouTube, which I'll share the link in the chat momentarily, of content that we already had in Ukrainian. And over the next several weeks, we will upload more Ukrainian videos and Russian language videos, hoping to get that content into the hands of as many kids and organizations as possible. So please feel free to share that with your teams, with partners on the ground, with family members, friends, through WhatsApp or other platforms as well. Now we are kind of in the phase 2 of our approach, where we're really looking at some of those lessons learned from other crisis settings. And Sesame has, particularly in response to Afghanistan, we developed what we call content bundles of different resources targeting different outcome areas. So social emotional learning, looking at videos that Sesame has or can produce that really target the emotional needs of children. We also have ebooks, resources, kind of play activities, articles for parents as well to support them. We're calling them content bundles. So across some of the outcome areas that you're seeing, so social emotional learning, playful learning, self-concept, that identity and cultural pride. And then in the phase 3 of this approach, really looking to develop new content with humanitarian organizations or government sponsors to think about what are we not thinking about right now? What do these communities need that we perhaps haven't developed in other responses? So really trying to be adaptive to the needs of children in the situation as it is, as Erica mentioned, every situation is different. And I think what is also really important to highlight here is, in all 3 of these phases, Sesame is doing formative research with children and communities on the ground to ensure that that language is appropriate, that cultural context is appropriate, to ensure there's nothing, triggering or nothing negative that is elicited in children by watching these videos, to make sure that we're being as responsive and responsible, I would say, as possible. But also, we also are looking for those partners on the ground to be able to get our resources into the hands of communities. We're a content provider. We're good at what we do, but we're not necessarily on the ground. So, thinking about in terms of scale, how can a WhatsApp chat box kind of accomplish some of those goals? I think just to highlight a quick data point that those on the call may be interested in. after posting our videos, our initial set of 10 videos about a week ago, we've reached about just over 200,000 views on all of the videos. But about 58% of that viewership is based in the United States, about 1% in Ukraine, 1% in Poland, 1% in Russia. Obviously, our intention is to get that content into the hands and to the cell phones and tablets and TV screens of kids in Eastern Europe. So what kind of campaign or technology should we be thinking about that's really going to shift that viewership to reach our target audience? So I think we're kind of at that stage right now after seeing that initial social media campaign, is how can we expand our reach based on the data that we have right now. Next slide. So these are kind of the key outcome areas that we're going to be thinking about across the 3 phases, which I highlighted: improve social emotional learning, playful learning, creating inclusive environments, and also positive self-concept. And next slide. And again, just to reiterate the videos that we have from our phase 1, we'll be sharing more of those videos over the next several weeks. So if you're looking for child-focused and child-centered videos, please do check back on that YouTube website every few weeks, because we'll have more of those resources available. But happy to answer any questions, and thank you again.
Great. Do we have any questions from the team?
I actually have a question for Julia. I mean, you guys are content experts around education. My question is then, during a time of crisis like now, do you have any advice on how to find the right balance between giving useful advice and creating a positive experience for a child?
Could you say that one more time?
So during a time of crisis, right, as content experts, do you have any advice on how to find the right balance between giving useful information or advice and creating a positive experience for a child?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I've been at Sesame for just a few months, and, one thing that I'm really impressed with the organization, particularly as they respond to this, is that, they're not trying to do something that they haven't done before. So really, relying on the expertise and the resources and the internal kind of brain power that the organization has. I think now we're at the point where we are kind of bringing in external experts. We will be hiring external experts, more specifically focused on Ukraine. We are kind of blessed to have some internal colleagues with regional experience that are helping kind of guide that process. But I would say, don't do something that you haven't done before. In a time of crisis, I think it can be kind of dangerous. And if you are, I would say, find a trusted partner that's going to help you kind of guide those initial case studies for your own organization to really be smart and responsible about it. Because I think, as everyone has seen, there's been an outpouring of support, for this crisis in particular, Afghanistan as well. But thinking about how to do that with the needs of also respecting, I think, the trusted institutions that are on the ground, that do have kind of that long-term knowledge is really important.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that response.
Thanks, Julia, for your presentation. That was really, really interesting. I have a question. Do you collect any data on your outcome areas via WhatsApp?
So in response to Ukraine, we haven't set those systems up yet. I think that's something that we're in the process of doing right now. I know we'll be doing some needs assessments through partnerships, potentially with Save the Children and UNICEF. But those are kind of in the initial stages, I would say. It's something I think that we definitely are looking for, particularly as we shift. This first phase approach, I think, is not necessarily looking to measure educational outcomes, but for the protracted response, which I think we'll be developing after the October period. I think in that instance, we would definitely want to have some more of that data.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay, well, thank you, Julia. And thanks for shedding light on the detailed process that is involved in planning the development of content to help families cope with, exposure to conflict and displacement. So very, very informative. So thank you very much again. I'm now going to hand over to Andrew and Milena from Clear Global. They will be sharing with us on how Clear Global uses AI to create more two-way conversations. Over to your team.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the contributions so far. They've been really interesting and in a way have fed into or confirmed a lot of the topics that I'm going to touch upon. We're going to touch upon briefly now. Yeah, Gustav talked about the need to get things deployed quickly. Pippa talked quite a lot about the need to design content carefully for the experiences that we're putting in front of people. And I think I'd like to pick some of that up. We've been partnering with Turn.io on a number of things, and I wanted to sort of highlight a bit where we come in this picture. So Clear Global, formerly known as Translators Without Borders, we have a huge translation piece to what we do, but on top of that, Clear Global has been providing a range of other expertise, which I'll talk about today. But our mission is really to help people get vital information and critically be heard, whatever language they speak. So a key part of this, as we scale this, is to use language AI to create more two-way conversations. Next slide, please. So what we really do is, aside from building the end solutions, is also work on the core technology. So building voice recognition systems, conversational chatbots, which would be the main focus of today, and machine translation, always generally with a focus on low resource languages that aren't well supported by mainstream providers. And our focus areas are in a number of development topics like financial inclusion and COVID and climate change and the others. But actually our background over the last 10 years has largely been in crisis response. And so we have a long track record of engaging with refugee, migrant, and IDP crises in Latin, Central America, South America, Africa, and Europe. Not just the current crisis in Europe, but the previous flows of people. So that's a bit of the idea of where we come from and what we're working on. Next slide, please. So we've seen a bit about the need to get this done quickly, and for that, playbooks are a key part of that, being able to deploy quickly on using standard approaches. And that's really, really important that good experiences are out there quickly, because there are a lot of not so good experiences, a lot of terrible chatbots out there. And so it's really good that we standardize the effort to get something out there quickly to occupy the space and win trust and start to be useful to people. Really what we're talking about is what happens after that as you go further and you want to engage more with people. And our expertise is really on developing from those initial systems into something that starts to give more control to the user, maybe starts to bring in live information via APIs and other available sources. These things are usually multilingual. So in most situations, now in Ukraine, for example, there is not just a bunch of different languages, but also a mix between the languages. That it means that the approach has to be fundamentally multilingual and very mixed in the way it uses language. And as we've also heard a few times today already, these things often need to be combined with other channels. So we've combined it with radio broadcasts or with hotlines or other approaches. So the idea of handing over or living in a space where the conversations aren't necessarily on one channel. And critically, these conversational experiences need to be able to learn from users well. And so building those and having that ambition. So Milena's going to talk briefly about some of these components in a bit more detail, not too much detail in the time available, but we'll hopefully give you a feeling for it. Milena.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I hope everyone can hear me well. So yeah, very briefly, how does the process, what's the process behind this approach? We want to start by understanding our users. Who are we engaging into the conversation? What languages do they speak and feel most comfortable with speaking? So basically here we're looking at user personas, user journeys, understanding the challenges, the motivations they have and the goals they have in accessing information. And this is also meant to create like the empathy for the user, so we can take better decisions on the design and the user experience going forward. Next slide, please. Then, of course, this is not a linear process for sure. It is iterative, like Pippa said, and it has to be iterative continuously. But the natural kind of next step is content design. So basically, looking at what topics then do we want to engage the users in? What are the frequently asked questions? It has been mentioned that from the experiences that you want to give this kind of possible automated solution to the most frequently asked questions. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at, of course, this is when the translation happens, and this is where kind of you design the messages, the core messages. Also thinking about again the language, but how to present the messages with plain language, or what terminology should be used. Of course, this comes kind of from the user research part, where you start to design what you want to speak about. Next slide, please. And finally, you kind of start to build that conversational design. And again, Pippa already touched upon those a few bits and pieces around what to think about, the tone of the chatbot, the or agent, or whatever you want to call it. And this is where we build trust. This is where we build consistency, likability, and this is where kind of this is where the magic happens. Like, this is where you really need to put a lot of effort into to build that flow, that interaction into the conversational design. Next slide, please. And as Andrew mentioned already, there's a kind of what conversational AI allows us to do is to listen. And we are, this is where we really put a lot of effort into capturing what people really are talking about. What kind of questions are they asking? How are they engaging? Are there any informational gaps happening that we can provide back into the design process to make sure that we fill these gaps and that we really provide people with the information they need. And conversational AI allows people to ask questions naturally. So this is something that we constantly need to listen to, and it's a sort of a feedback mechanism to what we want to do. So we build dashboards to constantly make us aware and create insights into how to build these meaningful conversations. Yeah, I'm handing over to Andrew.
Thanks, Melina. So I think, yeah, the key takeaway is really that there are these 4 parts of this that we've been building up expertise on over the last few years, really around creating these deeper experiences, these experiences that inspire more trust, and yeah, the expertise around that from a language point of view, from a design point of view, to make sure that we do a good job. I think. The next slide. So really just a little bit on the why. These things are, there's a little bit more effort to build these than with a more template-driven approach. The template-driven approach, as I said, is really good for getting us started, but I think we can build on top of that gradually to create more engaging experiences, more open experiences, where you're asking the user and allowing them to ask anything, if you like. The ask me anything sort of approach. This creates more engagement. It gives you a more dynamic and sort of natural experience. It allows the users to feel in control because they can then take the conversation where they want to go, and they're not just responding to what feels like a template-driven experience. And critically, by opening it up and by making it more dynamic and more engaging, you will learn more. You will gather valuable insights from your audience and be able to then build those back into the next version of the experience that's as you create it. So that's really what's behind this, the ability to take an understanding of the user. I'm here in Berlin. I've been spending my day with actually understanding the refugee journey in Berlin, what the reception areas are like and what it's like for people to be going through that experience in terms of the information they get, where they get it from. I can confirm, as some people have already done on the call, that WhatsApp is a key part of that, of how people get information. Yeah, we really need to be part of that conversation. So that's something I think we want to be involved in. Yeah, feel free to get in touch. I mean, I think our partners know where to find us, but if you could also reach out to us directly if you like.
Great. Any questions for Andrew and Milena? I had one. So I just want to understand, what are some of the challenges with using AI in crisis contexts?
Well, some of them have been touched upon already, in the fact that if we want to be learning from people and listening to people, then we have some issues to be very careful with. We've developed techniques building on top of what Turn have already had, but also obviously privacy and consent are very important in the way you design the conversations and the way you interact with people, especially people who are in danger potentially. So that's a key part of it. And also the speed at which you have to move. I mean, it's not just that you need to get something up and running quickly, but you need to accept the fact that the situation will change. And so we have this sort of newsroom concept where we want to keep the content live and fresh so that it's useful in an ongoing way. You can't just build this and then have it sit there and be available, because it needs, typically in any of these situations, it needs to be updated probably every other week, if not even more often than that, certainly at early onset stuff. So those are, I think, that two of the biggest issues that that one has to take seriously. And of course, the language issue. It's very important to understand what language. I remember one of the first talks Gustav gave that I heard was about how people lie when they talk about what languages they speak and what languages they understand, and so it's really important to take that seriously and to really understand how people get information and how they can digest information and it be useful to them. Great.
Thank you, Andrew. I know we're literally on time or over, but just moving on to, before we get to the next steps, what we'd like and appreciate is, for you, all the attendees, to share their experience by taking the next couple of minutes to fill out this survey. It's just 3 simple questions and shouldn't take you too long. And I'm going to go ahead and post that link right here in the chat window. We'll also be emailing it to everybody who's attending. Just 1 second here. You can click on that. Okay. And no, we really, really appreciate your feedback, and it'll be very important for us as we plan more of these boot camps during the course of the year. So please take the time to fill this out for us. Carola, if you can just go to the very last slide.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. So there are different ways for you to join and engage with our community. So a couple of things that we'd like to just highlight here quickly is you can join the Chat for Impact forum. We'll be sending you a follow-up email to show you how you can go ahead and do that. Also via our LinkedIn community to stay connected with us on future events and to receive latest updates. We also conduct weekly product training for existing and new clients on an ongoing basis on Tuesdays and Thursdays of the month. So we'll send you the details on how to sign up for those as well. And finally, if you want to connect to us via our WhatsApp support line, you can either scan the QR code that's on the slide or by simply sending a hi message to the number. Our partnerships team members will be in touch with you over the next few days to chat through next steps. And with that, I would like to really thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules for attending this bootcamp and learning more about how chat can impact lives and support vulnerable populations at scale during times of crisis. Have a lovely day, evening, or night, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you.